So you want to make bread. Excellent. Well, I'm going to try and walk through this process as quickly as possible and share the lessons that I've learned doing it. You need 4 ingredients for making bread. I use bread flour. I've tried it with AP flour. I don't like it as much. I'm not quite sure why. But, the bread flour apparently has more gluten, better for the bread, whatever. I use bread flour. Uh, 4 ingredients are flour, salt, water, and yeast. Yeast is the regular dry yeast that you get at the store. It comes, at the grocery store in those stupid little packets. I buy it at Costco, although it's a seasonal item. I buy a big, container of it, and it's dirt cheap, and it lasts pretty much for the whole year. And I just keep it in the fridge in a jar, and there's where it is. In terms of equipment that you need, I got my stand mixer, the good old KitchenAid stand mixer with the dough hook. I use 3 little bowls. You'll see why. That's to weigh out the salt and the yeast. I also use it to pull some flour and water out. I use a scale, so everything is done by baker's percentage, and I'll show how we go through that in just a little while. I get as big a bowl as I can with some plastic wrap for the top, where I let the bread or the dough proof. You're going to want to oil that bowl, so I get some spray oil. This one's some fancy avocado spray oil, which must make it better. And then for cooking, I use a perforated bread pan, which I got on Amazon. Is like 12 bucks. This one can do 4 loaves, which is great. Saves you time in cooking. And then, of course, you're going to need a rack for the bread to sit on and cool after it's cooked, so it doesn't get steamed. It'll stay nice and crispy. So that is everything you need. The one thing that's not here that you will need is a spreadsheet that I'll show you in a little while, and that spreadsheet will give you the percentages based on the volume of flour that you use. Okay, first step once you've gotten all your ingredients out is to weigh your flour. I'm going to use the baker's percentage, so all other ingredients are done as a percentage of weight of the flour weight. So I don't have to be exact. I don't measure cups or anything. I just basically get my bowl onto the scale. I want to do grams. So I make sure that it's zeroed out, which it is. And then for this one, I'm going to shoot for somewhere around 800 or 900 grams of flour. That should be enough for 4 loaves of bread. I don't really want to do more. I just end up wasting it. So I'm going to do 4 loaves. So okay, that is 897 grams of flour, but I like to take some out so I can use it for dusting the countertop as well as the top of the bread. So I just take one of my bowls, scoop out a bowl full, set it aside because I'll use it later. And then now my weight is down to 837. Okay, so here's where the modern magic comes in. I use a spreadsheet to help me with the figuring on figuring out the weights of the other ingredients, the water, salt, and yeast. I do that off of the weight of the flour. So if you remember, our flour after pulling some out came down to 837. And in my spreadsheet, I've played with different recipes. You can see the percentages that I've got. Flour would always be 100%, and I've played with water from 67% to 70%. I've played with yeast and salt down to like 1% each and up to 2%. The recipe that I've kind of settled on of late has been flour 100%, water 69%, yeast and salt 2%. So I'm going to enter my 837. And I can see now that my water at 69% will be 577, so I'll just say 578. And then yeast and salt will be essentially 17 grams. So 578 and then 17 grams, that's what I'm going to weigh out, and that will be our recipe. Okay, first ingredient, well, second ingredient after the flour is going to be the water. And so I'm going to do the water in my metal mixing bowl, and it's important to do it in this order. I will zero out my bowl, so now it's at 0. I want to measure out 578 grams of warm water. So water should be around 85 degrees or so, warm enough to activate with the yeast, not so hot that it will kill it. So I'm going to estimate 578 grams worth of water. And since I'm doing this one-handed, I will complain that I should have turned the water on faster. But now I'll typically estimate and try and get close, but I want to go a little over 578 because it's really easy for me to pull water out in order to get to the exact number, the exact measure. So call that good. And I'm going to see how well I did. Okay, way over. So that's 1,086. I'm going to dump some out. Eight 853. So now I just use a bowl, little bowl, and start taking water out until I get to my 578. So there's 613 that I'm at now. And yeah. Close. 576. Okay, 579. Close. Now I'm done with this little bowl that I used to pull water out. It's still clean, so I throw it back here. I've got another bowl, so the third one, and I'm going to zero this one out and use it to measure my salt and my yeast. So zero it out. First thing I'm going to do is my yeast, and I'll follow that with my salt. If I'm not mistaken, I think we're at 17 for yeast and salt. So I'm going to go ahead and get 17 for the yeast. Alright, so I was a little over on the yeast. I think it was like 18. That's no big deal. I've dumped it into the water to let it activate. Doesn't have to be in there long, but it's kind of nice to do it. Next is my salt. The same bowl will be used. It's already zeroed out. So I use kosher salt. It's the thick grain. A lot of places will say to use like the fine grain salt. I don't like it as much, so I do what I want. And yeah, 17, 18, pretty close. Going in with 18. All right. So I throw the salt in with my flour. I take my dough hook and give it a little mix. It's not really that big a deal. And I can let this sit for a couple minutes while the yeast activates, or I can just get started. But it's pretty much all set up now with my ingredients. I've got my wet ingredients in the mixing bowl. That's important. I'll pour my dry ingredients, which is just salt and flour, into the wet ingredients, and then I will mix it. So I'm done with my scale now. That can go away. It's actually pretty quick. I've finished with this bowl, which I used to measure the salt and yeast with. That can be cleaned. And I'm now going to throw my dry ingredients into my wet. So everything goes in. Ah, shit. And just a little pinch, since I spilled some on the floor, of additional flour. That's fine. Everything's good. Now I'm going to mix it. So I just use my bread hook or dough hook, whatever. And you'll use setting number 1 or 2 for about 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead, start this up. And it's pretty much bulletproof. You don't have to watch it. You just let it go, and pretty quickly it starts to bunch up. It'll ball up. It'll be a little chunky for a while, and then it'll get fairly smooth after a couple minutes. So I'll let it go, and I'll check it out again as it starts to ball up. Now in the meantime, what I can do and will do is put some spray oil into this bowl. So the bowl that I use for the dry ingredients, I'll just kind of get as much of that flour out as I can. I'll spray oil on it so that the dough won't stick, and I'll use that for it to proof. Okay, this has been going for a minute and a half now or so. It's getting pretty close. I like it to look a little smooth. I do like it to go a couple minutes. And the longer it goes, it gets all the crap off the edge of the bowl. It balls up nicely. 2 minutes is good. So I'm going to stop it now. It's looking pretty well mixed. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to underdo it. I will say that it mixes and blends a little bit more as it proofs, and you're going to need it to knock it down once it's proofing. So it's not, all of this is not overly precise. Alright, I'm going to stop this, crank it down, get my dough hook off. I'm not used to doing this one-handed. And then I just want to get my dough into my bowl, which I have oiled. You may or may not be able to see it, but it's oiled so the dough won't stick. And a lot of times, I'm not going to do it because I only have one hand. A lot of times I'll give it just a couple of kneads by hand. It's good to feel the dough too, to know what it feels like when it's right. But this will be fine. It's going to blow up over the next hour or so. We'll double in size, and then I'm going to knock it down, and I'll do that again. I'll do that a couple times before I'm ready to shape it into loaves and bake it off. Okay, dough is in the bowl, and you may not be able to see it, but I've covered it in plastic wrap. You want it covered, you want to keep the moisture in, and now you're going to let it proof. So I'm cooking it today. I'm going to cook it this afternoon. So I'm gonna proof it inside in a warm spot, and I'll probably have to knock it down probably 2 or 3 times so that it doesn't blow out of the bowl. My favorite way of cooking is to put it in the bowl and put the bowl immediately in the fridge. And putting it in the cold will slow down the yeast so that it won't proof as fast. And basically it's still going to, when I put it in the fridge, it'll still puff up to double its size. I'll have to knock it down, and it'll go up to close to double its size again. Knock it down, I figure, twice, and then the dough, by that time the dough is usually cool and it won't continue to expand, and it can sit in the fridge for 2 or 3 days easy, if not more. Usually I like to put it in the fridge, knock it down a couple times, and then we'll stop expanding, and I'll cook it the next day, and that's what makes the best bread. But you definitely need to proof it. You need to let it expand. That's part of the the fermentation process, if you will. The yeast is consuming its food, and it creates sugars as a byproduct as well as CO2. So you'll have air in here which will puff up, on the plastic wrap. But it's important for it to do that fermenting and to create those sugars so that you get a sweeter bread. You really want to make sure that you give it time to proof. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I cook it real quickly because I'm in a hurry. But I personally taste the difference in the flavor of the bread. Okay, it's been about an hour. It looks to be at least doubled in size or around double in size. I'm just going to punch it down. You want to get the air out. So I use two hands normally, but I'm videoing. But essentially just give it a quick knead. It can stay in the bowl. You don't really need to take it out. You just want to punch it down and then let it rise some more, which is what I'm going to do. So punch it down. I'll cover it up again and then okay, it's been about another hour. It's doubled in size again. I'm going to punch it down and then get it ready for shaping. In the meantime, while it's been doing that, I've made some chili that will go well with fresh bread. Oh yeah. And it's time to get the oven going. So you want the oven about as hot as it can go. Mine only goes to 500 degrees. So I will get it up to 500. You want as hot and steamy an oven as you can. I'm going to use the middle rack, but I'm going to put an old baking tray on the bottom rack, which I'm going to fill with water, and it will boil and steam the bread the entire time it's cooking. And you do that so that it retards the blackening or browning of the crust, and you can cook it longer. You can get a nice crispy crust, which you want. Okay, a few things before shaping. You want a clean, dry surface. I've just cleaned this a bit. You want to use the flour that we reserved earlier and be generous with it. Save some though, because you're going to sprinkle it on top. The pan, perforated pan, although it's supposed to be non-stick, I squirt it with a little spray oil just to make sure, and that way the loaves pop right off, so it's nice. So I'm going to spray this. I'm going to take my dough and put it onto a floured surface. I don't want to get too much flour on it. I don't want to add flour to it. I just want to make sure it doesn't stick. So I'm going to spray my pan now, and then I'm going to shape the bread. Okay, now I'm going to shape the dough. I made what I think is about right for 4 loaves, so that started with 800 something grams of flour. So I just want to do 4, so I'm going to take it, cut it in half, and then I'm going to take the halves and cut those in half. So now I should have roughly equal dough balls. And there is a science to shaping. I'm not very good at it. I understand that you're supposed to kind of roll it out a little bit, and then you kind of fold from either side, kind of like that. Get it out to the size you want, then put the seam down. And you want a little bit of a pointy end to your loaf. That is fine, but I found that frankly I can just roll it, and while it's not perfect, it's good enough for me. And again, I still want my pointy ends. And then you just put it on your oiled pan, and we're going to let it rise again. Okay, that's good sauce. Okay, it's been about 15-20 minutes. Oven is at 500, and the pan inside is boiling, giving me a nice steam. So now it's time to finish off the bread. The loaves have risen a bit. They probably could go longer, but I'm lazy. So I'm gonna do the last step in this to make him nice and pretty. Get a sharp knife And what you're going to want to do is cut slices at an angle. And I go at an angle and then down along the bottom, if you will, or sort of the bottom third. So it's down and along, down and along. I'm going to try and do it one-handed. I normally do two. So I will give it a shot. Don't be afraid to cut deep either. And just like that. Okay, they've now all been sliced. And the last thing that I have to do is use a little bit of the remaining flour and sprinkle it on there. And do it generously. Whatever's extra, you just blow off or shake off, whatever you want. But this makes it, I don't know why, but it makes it look a whole lot better. So definitely put the flour on after your cuts, and then we'll stick it in the oven. I just put the loaves in the oven, and my pan was getting a little dry, so I'm going to put some more water in. You definitely want some steam, particularly right at the beginning. They call this the jump, apparently, where your steamy bread kind of, or your bread dough kind of jumps with the steam. So definitely, I pour some in the pan in the bottom, and it will rise very quickly. So it's steamy in there. It's going to sit in the 500 degree oven for me, 550 or 600 if you can do better, for about 20 to 30 minutes until it's got a nice kind of dark brown color, if you will. About 6-7 minutes in, let's see how we're doing. Oh yeah, jumped up quite a bit. You can see the cuts now, looking good. I might give it a little more steam. I'm going to pour some more water in there. You'll be able to see it because I can't do it. Okay, been about 20-25 minutes. It's getting there. Light brown, but we want dark brown, so we'll let it go. Maybe a little more steam. Okay, it's been right about 30 minutes. I just looked at it. They look pretty darn good. Might be a little on the light side, but I'm going to take them out because I've got one in the middle. It's got a little bump up top, which was a shaping issue. But I'm going to take them out and get them onto the cooling rack. And I'll show you the finished product. Okay, here's the finished product. You can see the cuts. Looks pretty good. I had a couple of shaping issues on a couple of these, but I really don't care if they're not perfect. They taste good and they still look pretty good.